The sky still carried a faint blue hue of early morning mist when Laura Jensen stepped down the stairs. Her hair hastily tied back and a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The small wooden house nestled in the peaceful countryside remained wrapped in silence. No birds had yet begun to sing. The children were still asleep. And Louis, her husband, was softly snoring on the couch after a late night of work. Laura gently pulled back the living room curtain, her usual morning ritual before starting the day. But instead of the familiar garden view, she stumbled back, spilling the coffee onto the floor. In the gravel courtyard leading to the driveway, no more than 3 meters from the porch, stood a creature she never imagined she'd see this close. A full-grown male lion. A massive body covered in dark golden mane. Eyes smoldering like embers. But what took Laura's breath away wasn't fear. It was what he was carrying. In the lion's mouth, Kale, as she would later come to know him, was a tiny, motionless lion cub, held with a gentleness that defied belief. Laura stood frozen. A lion was at her door. But he wasn't growling. He wasn't attacking. He was waiting. "Louis," she hissed, eyes locked on the glass. "Come here, now." The sound of slippers shuffling came from behind. Louis stepped forward, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and froze as if ice water had been poured down his back. "Dear God," he whispered. "Are you joking? You think I'm joking about a lion?" Both of them stared through the window. There was no sign of aggression. No stalking. Kale did not growl. He didn't move. He stood there, like a warrior who had reached the end of his strength. And then the unthinkable happened. Kale stepped onto the porch, gently laid his cub on the wooden floor, and took a step back. He didn't take his eyes off them. But he didn't advance either. Laura felt her heart pounding. But not from fear. It was the heart of a mother sensing an unspoken plea. From a creature long labeled a beast. Kale hadn't come to threaten. He had come to entrust a fragile life. And Laura, who once faced despair deep in a forest years ago, did not yet know that she and Kale had once been part of the same past. And that fate, somehow, was bringing them back together. Laura stood frozen on the porch, each heartbeat pounding in her chest as if syncing with the faint breaths of the lion cub lying motionless on the wooden floor. Just a few steps away, Kale, the full-grown male lion, remained still beneath the canopy of an old tree near the driveway. His gaze never left her, yet there was no threat in it. His eyes, if one could call them that, were a chasm of pleading and trust. Louis gently tugged at his wife's arm. "Don't go near it. I'll call wildlife control. They'll know what to do." But Laura shook her head. Not out of recklessness, but out of something else entirely. Something deep, something instinctual. "No," she whispered. "That animal, it didn't come here to hurt us." Louis looked at her as if she'd just spoken to aliens. "It's a lion. Laura, do you hear yourself right now?" Laura didn't answer. Instead, she knelt beside the cub. It was breathing, barely, but still alive. Eyes shut tight, its matted fur coated in dust, sweat, and what looked like an infected wound on its belly. For a brief moment, a memory flashed in her mind. An afternoon 10 years ago, at a wildlife rehabilitation center, when Laura, then just a veterinary intern, had cared for a young lion cub with a badly injured hind leg. His name was Kale. She had stroked that soft, growing mane, looked deep into those wary, fearful eyes, until, slowly, they had learned to trust her. And every time he whimpered in his sleep, she had whispered, "I'll never let anyone abandon you again. Never." Then Kale had been released back into the wild. No news, no trace, a fragment of the forest. Laura had believed he was gone, like so many wild creatures that don't survive fate. And now, standing before her, was that very lion, grown, thin, exhausted, carrying a fragile life, standing at her doorstep, offering back an ancient trust. Laura whispered, "Kale." The name slipped out like a calling from memory. Kale blinked slowly. He didn't move, but his ears twitched slightly. And then, unexpectedly, he released a low, soft chuff. Not a roar, not a warning, but a greeting, a sign of trust, a reply. Louis flinched. "What the hell is happening?" "Laura? He remembers," she whispered. "He's Kale. I took care of him once." Louis stared at his wife, then back at Kale. He had no words left. And they both knew, This wasn't something that could be explained by logic or instinct. It was something far beyond the boundaries of human and beast. This was the return of an old promise. The beginning of a journey, once more. Laura gently wrapped a thin cloth around the tiny lion cub's frail body, checking the faint breath that shivered through its narrow chest. The skin beneath its damp fur was blistered and oozing. Likely an infection, or perhaps a wound from deep in the forest. Whatever it was, the cub wouldn't survive without immediate care. Louis held his phone, hands trembling from shock. He turned to his wife. "Are you sure about this? We're seriously bringing a lion cub, delivered by a full-grown lion, into our house and calling a vet?" Laura didn't blink. "Call Riverpine Wildlife Rescue Center. Ask for Dr. Benjamin or Lisa. Tell them it's Laura Jensen. They'll know who I am." Louis had no better option. He dialed. While outside, Cale still sat motionless like a stone sentinel, his eyes gleaming in the soft morning sun, watching every movement behind the wooden door. And the woman from long ago. Within 20 minutes, the rescue team arrived, a white van, marked with the emblem of a crane cradled in a human palm, rolled up the dirt path to the porch. 3 people jumped out, an elderly man with silver hair and round glasses, and 2 young technicians. That man was Dr. Benjamin, once the lead veterinarian at Riverpine, and the very one who had treated Cale alongside Laura years ago. He stepped out, scanning the area, and when his eyes met the lion resting silently near the edge of the grass, he froze. "It can't be," he murmured. Cale didn't move, but his eyes quietly locked onto the old man, as if verifying, confirming. "It's Cale," Laura said as she stepped forward, gently cradling the cub in her arms. "I'm certain." Dr. Benjamin stood still for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "We need fluids immediately. The cub has a dangerously high fever. Old wound, infected." Cale shifted slightly when the strangers touched his cub, but Laura raised her hand, a gesture rooted in memory and trust, and whispered, "Cale, they're good people." The adult lion stopped. He didn't growl. He didn't advance. He simply watched, like a wary father, as they gently lifted his fragile child onto the stretcher, wrapped it in warm blankets, hooked up the IV, and placed it into the temperature-controlled van. "We're taking it to the center. 12 miles from here," Dr. Benjamin said. "If nothing complicates, we can stabilize it within the next few hours." Laura gripped his hand tightly. "Save it, not just for the cub, but for Cale." As the van doors shut, Cale still didn't move. He didn't follow the vehicle. He didn't walk away. Cale simply sat there, in front of Laura's house, like a monolith from some primeval age, guarding, waiting, and placing his trust in the only human he had ever remembered. And in Laura's heart, the shock had shifted into something deeper, a debt of grace. Night fell over the quiet countryside like a heavy blanket draped across old memories. But on Laura's front lawn, there was no rest. Cale was still there, unmoving, unwavering, as though time itself no longer applied to such a creature. Louis stood by the living room window, the curtain pulled halfway open, his eyes fixed on the dark shape crouched beneath the great oak. "How long do you think he'll stay?" Laura didn't answer right away. She was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, holding an old photo, a picture from over a decade ago, of a young brunette girl gently holding a lion cub with a bandaged leg. The gaze in that cub's eyes, Cale's eyes, looked up at her with the raw, ancient trust of the natural world. "As long as his cub hasn't come back," she said quietly, "he won't leave." And she was right. All through the night, Cale did not move. As dew began to settle on the grass, the lion only shifted his posture, resting his chin on his front paws, his ears twitching from time to time at the sound of an owl's call, or wind brushing through the poplars. Those eyes, amber and clear, remained fixed on the cabin, like a guardian of memories. At the Riverpine Rescue Center, Dr. Benjamin and his team didn't sleep either. The lion cub, now named Noor, lay in a special isolation chamber. Tiny IV lines delivered nutrients and antibiotics drip by drip. The heart monitor signaled each faint but steady beat. "She's past the critical point," a vet nurse whispered at 3 a.m. "But she needs strength, and a miracle." Dr. Benjamin nodded. "We've already had a miracle, that lion father." At dawn, Before the sun crested the hilltops, a white rescue truck pulled up in front of Laura's house. As the door opened, Laura stepped out from the porch, wrapped in an earth-toned shawl, eyes still red from a sleepless night. Dr. Benjamin didn't need many words. Noor is recovering, but we need to try something. From inside the truck, he stepped out holding a small handheld speaker, the kind used in animal training exercises. He played a short recording from his phone. Noor's soft whimpers, her gentle breathing, the slight rustling as she stirred while being held. Kale, lying beneath the tree, lifted his head instantly. He stepped forward once, paused, then took another step, ears raised, nose sampling the air. When the sound ended, Kale let out a low, resonant chuff, a sound lions only reserve for those they know, those they love. He recognizes it, Benjamin whispered. He knows she's alive. Laura placed a hand over her chest, her heart pounding faster than it had in years. For the next 2 days, Kale remained within the perimeter of the cabin. Like a quiet, loyal sentinel, he only moved at night, pacing along the fence line, before returning to the same spot to stand guard. He's waiting, Laura said to Lewis, her eyes still locked on the window. And so am I. The following afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the trees in long golden shafts, Laura sat alone in the old storage shed behind the house. She sifted through dusty boxes, her eyes scanning for fragments of a time long past. And then, she found it, a faded brown notebook, its leather-trimmed edges worn thin, the cover embossed with the words, "Riverpine, that summer." She opened it. The yellowed pages immediately pulled her back 13 years. First day, the lion cub was so aggressive. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't let anyone near him. But when it rained, he curled up trembling in the corner of the pen. And I just sat there, saying nothing. After an hour, he crawled over on his own, and laid his head on my leg to sleep. From that day on, he always came to find me whenever a storm rolled in. I named him Kale. It means a warm flame on a cold night. Because his eyes, they looked like they held fire inside. Not wild, just sad, like he was remembering something. He never really had the chance to understand. Laura paused, her hand trembling slightly. The day he was released into the wild, I couldn't stop crying. Kale stood at the edge of the fence for a long time. He looked back 3 times, as if making sure I was still there. I told him, "Live free, but if one day you need to come back, you will always be welcome." Back then, Laura never thought Kale would remember. No one believed a lion could hold on to memories that long. But now, as Kale lay silently in the yard, like an unmoving guardian, she knew he had never forgotten. Lewis stepped inside, quiet as he saw his wife surrounded by scattered papers, tears silently falling down her cheeks. "You took care of him?" he asked softly. Laura nodded. "I never thought he'd survived. Everyone said Kale got separated when he was reintroduced into the wild. But he did survive. And today, he brought his cub to me, as if to fulfill a promise." Lewis sat beside her, gently taking her hand. "You saved him. Now, he's come back. Because he trusts you again." Laura looked out the window, to where Kale still rested motionless beneath the tree. People say the wild is cold, indifferent, but in those eyes, she saw the past, and the miracle she once didn't dare believe in. Memory, loyalty, and a love that endures time. Early the next morning, mist still blanketed the grasslands as Laura gently opened the front door. Kale was still there. He hadn't left. All night long, he had remained beneath the large tree, unmoving, like a monument guarding the promise he had carried back with him. A pickup truck from the Wildlife Rescue Center pulled up to the gate. 2 staff members stepped out, carrying medical kits, a tranquilizer gun, and a transport cage. But when one of them started approaching Kale with the tranquilizer rifle, Laura raised her hand sharply. "No," her voice was firm, edged like steel. "If you tranquilize him, he'll see it as betrayal." The man stepped back, startled. "You know this lion that well?" Laura nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Let me lead him. He'll follow me. I believe that." Lewis stood nearby in silence. He had long accepted that Laura could feel animals as if they were souls. But today, he understood, this wasn't just intuition. This was a promise being fulfilled. Laura stepped toward Kale. She brought no leash, no food, nothing but her voice. The same voice that had lulled Kale to sleep during storms 13 years ago. "Kale," she called, as soft as a passing breeze. The lion lifted his head, his amber eyes locking onto hers. "Your son is waiting. He needs you. Do you want to go with me?" Kale rose, slowly, heavily, as if he carried the weight of all the wilderness he had known. But his steps were steady. And after a moment of stillness, he followed her. No command, no tether, only pure trust, the kind that thousands of years of evolution could never erase. Between a lion and the woman who once cared for him, the rescue staff stood speechless. The truck door opened. Laura climbed into the front seat. She turned around, tapped lightly on the rear bed. Kale didn't need to be told twice. He leapt into the truck bed, lay down, his eyes still fixed on the cabin, as if to tell himself, "I will return." Lewis reached through the door, grasping her hand. "You're not afraid he won't recognize his cub?" Laura shook her head. "He knows. A parent's heart never gets it wrong." The truck rolled forward, leaving behind the peaceful countryside, down the red dirt road that led back to the rescue center. None of them knew what lay ahead. Would the wild instincts return? Or would a miracle truly unfold? But Laura believed. Kale had already made his choice. And he would not look back. The Wildlife Rescue Center nestled deep in the northern forest ranges, where endless pine trees stretched toward the sky, and the crisp, clean air wrapped around every wound like a gentle blanket. When the pickup truck rolled to a stop, no one said a word. Everyone felt it, the sacredness of what was about to happen. Kale remained still in the truck bed, but his ears twitched, listening. And when a faint cry echoed from inside the recovery wing, thin, fragile, yet as clear as a soul's tether, Kale rose instantly. "That's him," Laura whispered. His cub. Dr. Elena, the lead veterinarian, stepped out from the special care unit. "The cub's out of danger now. But he's still very weak. If you're going to try a reunion, this is your one chance." Laura looked into Kale's eyes. He was already stretching toward the white building, letting out a low growl. Not a roar of prey, but the deep, instinctive call of a parent. Dr. Elena nodded. "All right, but we do it on his terms." They opened the gate to the therapy garden, the only open-air enclosure where an adult lion could enter. Without causing panic, a temporary pen had been set up inside, where the lion cub lay curled up, its eyes still fogged from fever, its limbs twitching faintly whenever it heard sounds from outside. Kale stepped in. No one stopped him. No one dared. The entire room froze. Every camera, every eye turned toward the unfolding miracle. Kale moved slowly, step by step, until he stopped at the pen's edge. He lowered his head, nose gently brushing against the cage bars. From inside, the cub, still too small to roar, could only let out a faint rasping cry as it lifted its head. Then, slowly, as if responding to a memory not yet fully formed, it cried back. Kale let out a chuff. That rare, tender sound lions reserve only for those they love. An invisible embrace. And in that exact moment, the cub struggled to its feet. Laura broke into tears. So did every staff member in the room. This was not instinct. This was something more. They opened the cage. Kale didn't charge in. He waited. And when the cub stumbled out, Kale lowered himself, extending one paw as if to receive him. Then, with exquisite care, he began licking each wound on the cub's body. Gently, reverently, as if afraid to cause pain. No roaring, no panic, only the primordial purity of parental love. Kale lay down fully, wrapping his front legs around his cub. The cub nestled into his chest, letting out small, exhausted whimpers, like a child finally returning to the safest place in the world. No one could speak. Laura whispered, "He wasn't wrong." And then the entire room erupted. Not in applause, but in a silence so complete, so full of reverence, that it said more than words ever could. They had just witnessed something that might only happen once in a lifetime. The image of Kale curling around his cub didn't just move the hearts of those present. It became a global phenomenon. The video capturing the moment of reunion between the lion and his cub went instantly viral, spreading across social media and among zoological circles alike. But along with the emotion came one profound question that left the scientific community stunned and speechless. How could a wild lion not only remember the exact location where a human once saved him more than a decade ago, but trust that same human enough to entrust his child's life to her? Within 48 hours of the event, experts, researchers, journalists, and global wildlife conservation groups gathered at the Rescue Center's conference hall for an emergency summit. Led by Dr. Elena, every theory was put on the table. Perhaps Cale recognized Laura's scent from memory. Could he have been secretly trained? Impossible. Cale was released back into the wild. Before he turned 1, he had no human contact for over 10 years. At the far end of the room, Laura sat in silence, but inside her mind, memories flickered like black and white film. Cale, once a wounded cub caught in a poacher's trap, had clung to her arm during a fever. He had trembled at thunder, and only fell asleep when she softly sang beside him. "I thought I saved him." Laura finally spoke, quietly. "But maybe Cale engraved me into his memory. Far deeper than I ever imagined." A senior researcher from France slowly stood. "I've dedicated my life to studying wild animal behavior," he said. "But this cannot be explained by conventional theory. This isn't instinct. It's emotional memory." The room fell into stunned silence. Emotional memory. Not scent, not geography, but a heart that remembers. From that day on, universities began introducing Cale's case into advanced studies on animal cognition and interspecies bonds. Hundreds of articles, reports, and roundtable debates emerged, yet nearly all circled back to the same conclusion. Cale did not act like a lion. He acted like a parent who had once been saved, and now returned to save his own child, by placing trust in the human who once held him. For Laura, scientific discourse meant little. There was only one truth that mattered. Cale had come back, not out of instinct, but out of trust. While the world debated, Cale and his cub were relocated to a protected biosphere sanctuary near the Sierra Mountains. A vast, semi-wild reserve, far from human settlement. The International Wildlife Conservation Trust constructed a dedicated habitat, allowing Cale's cub, now named Noor, to heal naturally, within her mother's care. And then, one quiet night, under a silver sky, Cale did something no one expected. Just when the world believed Cale had returned to the wild for good, that she and her cub were safely hidden in the biosphere sanctuary, deep in the Sierra Ranges, the unthinkable happened. That night, there was no moon. Laura had just laid down to sleep when she heard the doorbell ring. Louis was the first to step out. Cautiously, the motion light flicked on automatically, casting a soft glow across the flagstone path and the patch of grass near the porch. And then, he froze. Laura rushed out as soon as she heard his whisper. "It's happening again, Cale." She stood there, still and regal. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a young lion, healthy and alert, eyes wide with curiosity, blinking softly beneath the warm porch lights. Cale hadn't come to ask for help. She had come to give thanks. She stepped slowly toward the porch. No growl, no threat, only a silence so deep it felt ceremonial. Cale stopped 3 meters away from Laura, close enough to meet her eyes, but distant enough to honor something ancient: respect. Laura stepped forward, trembling, her hand lifted without thinking. And then, in a motion so gentle it made Louis gasp aloud, Cale leaned forward and touched her forehead softly against Laura's chest. A simple touch, but it felt like 100 memories being passed between them. In one breathless moment, Louis slowly approached, and so did the cub. Laura knelt, extending a hand. The young lion didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Her scent, her voice. Perhaps the cub remembered, too. Cale looked up, her amber eyes deep as time itself. That gaze wasn't just gratitude. It was a request. "Be the keeper of our memory." Laura didn't hear it. She felt it. After several long seconds, Cale turned, the cub following quietly behind. Laura didn't call out. She didn't try to stop them. She understood. This moment wasn't meant to be held. It was meant to be remembered. They disappeared into the dark. No sound, no trace. Laura stood there for a long time, tears streaming, not out of sorrow, but because some things are too beautiful to ever be held in words. The next morning, she called Dr. Elena and recounted everything. At first, the team was skeptical, But when Laura sent the security footage, capturing every quiet step, every silent breath, they were stunned. A wild lion, once saved by humans, had not only remembered, but returned, to say thank you. There was no scientific framework to explain it. No textbook had ever documented behavior like this in the wild. But Kale had done it. Not once, but twice. From that moment on, Laura was no longer just a conservationist. She became the guardian of a sacred story. One of memory, motherhood, and a gratitude that rose beyond instinct, beyond species, into something eternal. News of the astonishing reunion between Kale and Laura spread like wildfire. It began within wildlife conservation circles, then reached international nature channels, and finally, exploded across social media. Millions around the world began speaking the name Kale, a lioness who was not only once rescued by a human, but who remembered with such clarity and emotion that she returned, not once, but twice, each time for a completely different reason. But what left the world stunned was not just what Kale did, it was what her actions meant. We used to believe wild animals lived purely by instinct. But Kale has proven they also possess memory, gratitude, and the ability to choose. This isn't just a story about a lion, it's a lesson in connection beyond biology. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, speaking at a special National Geographic press conference. Laura, once a reclusive conservation volunteer, suddenly became the quiet center of a global phenomenon. Hundreds of researchers arrived. Documentary crews scrambled for interviews. Universities requested materials to include Kale's case in ethology curricula. Laura agreed, but with one condition. No one is to approach the sanctuary where Kale may return. She is not a spectacle. She is a mother, a symbol of something far greater than science. Lewis, ever the steady presence, began archiving every detail digitally. From Kale's first appearance with her ailing cub, to that silent, sacred night when she came back. A website was created, KaleRemembered.org. Within 48 hours, it had over 2 million subscribers. From around the world, similar stories poured in, of animals returning to the humans who once saved them, of behavior far beyond instinct. Yet one question lingered in the air. Where had Kale been all these years? How did she find her way back to the exact same house? Dr. Elena and her team began poring over satellite data, lion migration patterns, terrain maps between the Riverbend Reserve and Laura's homestead. The distance? Over 70 miles. Through rough, mountainous terrain. No prior signs of her leaving the reserve. If she truly crossed all that wilderness, to return to a place held only in memory. This was not instinct. This was pilgrimage. A wildlife biologist, speaking on BBC Earth. Then came the breakthrough. As a cub, Kale had worn a GPS-tracked collar during recovery. Later removed when she was rewilded. But the system retained a record of all locations where she slept overnight. One of the last recorded points? Behind Laura's house. Kale had come back before, silently. And only when it mattered most. Did she step out of the shadows? Her story became a 90-minute feature documentary. The Lion Who Remembered, premiering at the World Wildlife Documentary Festival. The film didn't just win awards. It moved millions to tears. While the scientific world scrambled to decode Kale as a biological and emotional anomaly, Laura simply said, "I don't need her to prove anything. I just needed to know that she's alive, and that when the world closed its doors, Kale still believed in kindness." It had been 3 weeks since Kale left the farm. No one knew where she had gone. Only faint pawprints in the mud at the forest's edge. And a lingering sense that something was not yet finished. Every morning, Laura still rose early, stepped onto the porch, her eyes sweeping the narrow trail between the trees. The same path where she had last seen Kale look back. Her cub pressed close to her side, both fading into the mist. There was an emptiness, not like grief, but like the quiet departure of someone who had fulfilled something sacred. Then, on a late winter morning, with frost still clinging to the grass, something extraordinary happened. A soft knock at the wooden door. Not loud, just like wind brushing gently. Laura opened the door, and froze. Kale was standing there, alone. No warning, no roar, no footfalls. Just a gaze, gentle, still, and final. Her fur was puffed slightly from the cold. But her eyes remained bright. Her steps were slower now, but dignified as ever. Kale didn't come forward. She didn't need anything. She didn't beg for food. She wasn't seeking salvation. She came only to say goodbye. Laura stepped down onto the porch. The distance between them, one woman and one lioness, was now only a few steps. Kale, the name slipped out like a whisper. But Kale heard it. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes scanning Laura's face, as if rereading each line of memory. One last time, Laura reached out her hand. Kale didn't move closer, but she didn't step back either. Instead, she released a low chuff. That soft, familiar sound, a final greeting, a perfect full stop to a story between the wild and the human. And then Kale turned away. No urgency, no regret, only purpose. Her paws pressed softly into the wet snow, leading back into the forest. Lewis, the quiet man behind all of this, stepped outside. He wrapped his arm around Laura's shoulders. Together, they watched Kale disappear, a friend they never expected to see again, but who had returned, because goodbye needed to be said. 3 weeks later, rangers found the body of a large lioness, resting beneath an old tree, in a quiet clearing roughly 10 miles from Laura's house. No signs of trauma, no bullet wounds, no struggle. She had simply laid down. And there was something deeply peaceful about where she had chosen to do it. Kale lay on her side, head nestled gently against the tree, as if asleep, eyes closed, body clean, and utterly at peace. They knew it was her from the small crescent-shaped scar on her left flank. The same one she bore since she was first rescued as a cub. At the Riverbend Wildlife Station, Laura did not cry. She only took a long breath, and felt thankful. She lived the way she chose. And when it was time to end, she came back, to say goodbye. Lewis placed a smooth white stone at the forest's edge, engraved with the words, "Kale, the lioness who remembered, who gave thanks, and taught us something about love beyond species." That spring came earlier than usual. On the hill behind Laura and Lewis's farm, wildflowers bloomed in bursts of purple, yellow, and white, as if nature itself was joining a sacred farewell ceremony. At first, the locals, once wary of the story about a lion who lived near a house, began asking questions. They were no longer afraid. They were curious. And then, from curiosity, came reverence when they heard the story. Laura, who had intended to keep what happened between her and Kale private, changed her mind when a 10-year-old boy from the village school showed up at her gate. He held a drawing, a lion and a woman standing together in the forest. "Are you the lady from the story?" the boy asked. Laura looked at the drawing, and for the first time since Kale vanished into the woods, she truly smiled. So, Laura began to speak. She accepted an invitation to share at the local school. Then came animal conservation groups. Then the Interspecies Communication Conference in Nevada. The story of Kale, the lioness who returned out of trust in one human, became a living symbol of gratitude, enduring memory, and love that transcends instinct. What began as a private memory became an inspiration. Lewis built a small memorial near the edge of the forest, the place where Kale had once stood. Watching the porch, a large granite stone, carved with Kale's portrait, her gentle eyes, proud stance, stood in the middle of a lush green patch. At its base, the inscription read, "Where instinct ends, gratitude begins. Kale, you did not forget." People came to visit. Schoolchildren left handwritten letters beneath the stone. A renowned photographer from National Geographic asked permission to create an exhibit about the story. And Laura said yes, not for fame, but because she knew, if Kale had returned to place her trust once more, then the rest of humanity must keep telling the story. And then, another day. Another surprise. One morning, as Laura stepped out onto the porch, just as she had done every day since Kale left, she saw a young lioness. Not Kale, not a male, but a young female, with a slightly stiff gait, darker coat, and amber eyes. But in those eyes, there was something familiar. Laura didn't approach. She just stood there, placed a hand over her heart. The lioness looked at her. Not afraid, not aggressive, just watching, as if recognizing. Then she turned toward the forest. But before she disappeared, she chuffed. That soft, rumbling exhale lions used to say. "I remember. I trust." Laura collapsed into Lewis's arms, tears falling not from sorrow, but from the certainty that Cale's legacy wasn't over. It was continuing, through what she left behind, in the wild, and in the hearts of those she had touched. The story of Cale was never just about a lioness mother. It was about loyalty, memory, and the conscious choice of a wild creature to return to the one who had once saved her, to entrust her with something sacred. Trust. Laura now tells that in every talk she gives. We think the wild is emotionless. But Cale taught me this. Sometimes, the ones who live outside the language of humans love the clearest and the most purely. And she always ends with a question. If a lioness can remember a single act of kindness for over 10 years, then we, with all our memory, reason, and hearts, are we living in a way that deserves it? There are stories that keep your eyes glued to the screen. And then there are stories that never let go of your heart. Cale, a lioness mother in the harsh wild, did not choose instinct. She chose memory. She chose trust. She chose to return to the human who once saved her, when her own cub stood between life and death. This was no miracle. It was proof of something greater. Love is a language that transcends species and time. This isn't just the story of a lioness. It's the story of us. Of kindness. Of unspoken promises. And of the quiet way nature watches us, waiting to see if humanity is still worthy of its trust. If you believe that love can rise above survival instinct, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share Cale's story with someone who needs a reminder that there is still good in this world. And sometimes, nature is where it quietly lives on. What touched you most in the journey of Cale and Laura? Leave us a comment below. We read every word, and your voice fuels the next story we tell. Thank you for walking with us to the very end. And remember, trust, even once, can change a life forever.